Hey everybody, Greg Cazillo from Cazillo.com. We are here with Scott. He had emailed me a while back, said, man, we really need to get a conversation going about some photos that I've taken. I really need some pointers to get these questions answered. And since then, he's taken some photos that we're going to go over, some really awesome sports photos here of, is it your kid, Scott?
No, I did it for a friend of mine, a coworker, and his kid made it pretty far in their little junior football league, so we took a shot at it.
Okay. So anyway, we'll go over some of his questions, learn something. The first thing I saw was, why aren't these kids wearing helmets? What's the deal there?
It's flag football. You know, they're actually this year they are wearing helmets. They were hitting really hard. It was crazy. I was wondering why they weren't wearing them already.
Okay, good. So tell me a little bit about your photography. You're in Texas, right?
Yeah, Southeast Texas.
Okay.
I do a lot of sports, you know, for parents and things like that, and also my niece, my nephew, just kids sports of the sort.
Uh-huh.
And going to start getting into the a little bit older kids, and hopefully some college stuff pretty soon. I've got some decent connections to get into the college games.
Good.
Also some concert photography, things like that. Of course, in my leisure time, usual landscape and wildlife, things like that.
Okay, excellent. And you said you have a D3S and any other bodies?
My wife's got a 7000, a D7000.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Good. At least it's an all Nikon family. That's a good thing.
Oh, of course.
Excellent. Okay, so what's your question about the sports? You said you were having with shutter speed issues or focus, or where are we at?
Well, one of the things I found most difficult is, first off, was focus point. It's really difficult a lot of times to keep the focus point right on their face to make sure that they're in focus. How much leeway is there shooting at 2.8 for focusing, maybe on their body or center mass, or are there other places to focus that would be, I guess as long as it's on the same plane, or what would you recommend for that?
Well, it really comes down to a couple of things. Number one, the farther away, if you're shooting at 2.8, that's when you're really going to be worried about it, when you're shooting wide open. If you're not shooting wide open, if say you're shooting at f4 or at 5.6, even with a 70-200 lens or a 300mm lens, you probably won't have an issue, because as you know, your depth of field is going to get wider, and so it's not going to be as much of an issue when you're at f4 or 5.6. Now, the same thing is going to happen when the subject is farther away. As the subject is farther away, your depth of field gets greater. When the subject gets closer, your depth of field gets smaller. And that goes all the way down to a macro lens, when it's tiny little bit of amount of space. So when they're at a distance with a 70-200 lens or something like that, you probably don't need to worry. What I would do is I would do some testing with that kind of center, I forget, the dynamic area focus, and try the different tracking modes.
Right, and I was going to ask you about that as well. But as far as the distance, so if they're further away, no problem sticking with 2.8 for the most part, but the closer they get, just stop it down, a stop or so, just to give myself a little bit more leeway, possibly, or...
if they're out away from you on the field, you find yourself at 200mm to fill the frame like you are here.
Right.
I don't know if you were at 200 here, but they're farther away.
Probably.
And you're zoomed in all the way. You're probably not going to have an issue. I mean, the second kid back here, number 5, he's 10 yards away. Right? He's 5 yards away. Sorry, with the with the lines. He's 5 yards away, and he's just starting to really fall out. But these two kids are on top of one another, and they're still pretty sharp here on the right-hand side. So, you have at least a yard or so. Even that line right there is still pretty much in focus, out to about there. So, if you're looking at the grass, you can kind of see your depth of field, where it's at. I mean, up here in this corner is still sharp, and it's not really falling out until you get down to about here in the middle of that line in between them, and it's still sharp over in here a little bit. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So you can kind of see your depth of field and where it's falling. Now, what happens, not only that, with the farther away the focus is, the person is, or the thing you're focusing on is, the wider your depth of field, or the wider that area is. But the other thing which just slipped my mind as I was saying that, I hate it when I do that. The 1/3, 2/3 rule of focus. So if you're focusing center mass, 2/3 of your focus is going to be behind that point. So you should be fine most of the time. In that case,
if it's coming towards you, I mean that's closing the gap, but I guess that's dependent upon the autofocus of the camera, really.
Yes.
Keeping up with it if you're continuous and all, which you should be.
Yep, that's a continuous focus thing, and it should be locking on. It should be follow focusing, and you shouldn't have too much of an issue with that, especially if you're using a decent lens. Which lens did you have?
70-200 VR2.
Okay, so you should have no issues follow focusing with that camera at all. These kids aren't running fast enough or moving fast enough for them to blow past that lens.
I think you'd be surprised, but you're right. No, they do move pretty quick, but you mentioned. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
If you're talking about your 7000, you'll definitely see a difference in between the two of those. Okay. If you would take that 7000 out, you might have trouble with follow focus on that 7000 and a 70-200 VR2. You might not be able to do it as they're running by you or they're running right towards you. If they're running left or right, across the frame, then you shouldn't have an issue. But when they're coming towards you or going away from you, you might have a little bit more trouble keeping up with them, or the body would have trouble keeping up with them versus the D3S or the D700, which shouldn't have any issues.
Well, I have noticed a pretty big difference between the 7000 and the 700 and the D3S as far as how fast it focuses. But, I see what you mean. If it's on the same plane, it's not going to have to work as hard for it anyway.
Exactly.
Now, you mentioned dynamic focus. Does it really matter how large the dynamic area is? Because I know you can change, I think, 9 points, 11 points. Do you use it that much? I mean, do you recommend it?
I only use dynamic area focus if I'm shooting sports or something that's moving. All the other times I'm on the single point focus, and I put that single point of focus usually on the face or somewhere where I know it's going to be, that's my focus point, and that's it.
Right. So there shouldn't be any problem as long as, focusing just center mass, as long as they're on the same plane. I mean, like they're leaning way over and I'm focused on his chest. Well, then obviously his face is going to be, if he's towards me or something, they're going to be out, right?
Probably not, because again, I think you're going to have, he's far enough away that you're not going to have an issue.
If he's closer, it would be a problem.
Yeah, if you're shooting, I think if you were shooting, if you were zoomed all the way in and say you were only shooting half his body, that was all you were getting is half of his body from, waist up to his head, that means he's going to be pretty darn close to you, and then you're going to have an issue. But I don't think getting, shooting head to toe, zooming in, and was this cropped at all? Or was this full frame?
I filled the frame pretty good on those, but chances are at 200 on full frame, it's probably cropped a bit.
Okay, so even better.
That's the only thing I don't, it's just hard to do with a 200 on full when they're that far away. You can't fill the frame.
Yep. Okay, so if that's an issue, if that's the thing, if this is already cropped, then you're not going to have any issues, I don't believe. Okay. You by looking at this right here, you probably have 2 yards of focus right here, 2 yards of depth of field. I don't know what your what do you call it? Your aperture was. Sorry, sorry guys. I'm a little off tonight.
Most of those were shot at 2.8, I believe.
They were at 2.8. All right. Yeah. So, but again, looking back at your grass here, you have a solid 2.5 yards of depth of field here, and you can really see it in the grass how it's sharp here and then it's out here. So, I really don't think you're going to have an issue.
Okay. So dynamic is you don't have a problem with that at all as long as it's fast moving.
Not at all. That's your dynamic. Yeah, your dynamic is made to move across. So you do your best to put it on him as he's running to kind of grab him, so that the focus point can kind of grab him, and then the dynamic is made that once you have you're locked on, it should follow him anywhere in that frame. Now, I do suggest turning it on the maximum number of points. I think it's 51 or 52, whatever it is in the D3S. Yeah. Turn it on the maximum number of points and use them all. Don't bother with the 9 or 11 or any of those little ones. Just turn them all on, and you'll be glad that you did.
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask next. Is use them all, or just kind of keep it at a narrow point, or that you're just saying use the whole thing, let it go.
Yep, use every single one, and you're gonna be glad you did, especially when you're shooting static objects, because it makes it so much easier to be able to just move down just a hair or to the right just a hair, versus some of the other cameras that don't have that many points. It's a huge advantage to have all them. The only thing that I wish that the D3S did have, and I don't know if the D4 does or not, is points all the way out to the edges. I really wish that there were more points out to the edges, even if they weren't quite as accurate. Were there issues with them?
It does make it difficult. Yeah.
Give me the option. That's the way I feel. Is give me the option to have those, because it'd be nice to have that full coverage.
Yeah, and you can't exactly focus and recompose with a moving subject like that.
No, not at all. Not at all. So let's take another look at another photo here.
Okay.
So another guy, was he cropped too?
Again, I don't remember which ones were cropped and which ones were not.
Okay.
Let me see.
But same idea, like we said. We have, we probably have 3, probably it looks like it probably about 3 yards here of distance. Looking in the grass again of depth of field, and it's all sharp, and so I don't think that's going to be an issue at all.
Okay.
Okay.
But you don't see anything wrong with shutter speed or they're pretty tight. So you think 500th of a second would be a fairly decent minimum?
Yeah. Let's see what you shot these at. And actually, these were your D700.
Yeah, some of those were 700.
Son, you're at 1/3200th of a second at 2.8 at ISO 200. So you have plenty. There's plenty of shutter speed. It doesn't even matter. You're already way down.
That day was plenty bright and plenty of light, so there's no problem with that at all. But on darker days, I guess what would you say would be a minimum shutter speed to freeze the motion? About 500 or so?
Probably in the 500th range. If you're saying these kids are running pretty quick, I would definitely start around the 500th. Shoot a couple photos, maybe even do some tests the day before or something. Get one of these kids to run at you, well, not run at you, that you actually want them to be running across so that you can see their trails if there is any out of focus area. Just have them sprint right in front of you, take a picture at a 500th, and see if that's going to stop it all. If you can't do some testing the day before, what you can do, at least what I do on my camera, I think you can set it on a D700 and also on the D3, D3S. I don't know if you can do it on the D7000. Is the center button inside of the D-pad or the multi-selector. That center button you can set to zoom in on their face or zoom in on the focus point, and you can very quickly zoom in and tell if that focus point was sharp, and if your focus point is sharp, that's also going to tell you if your shutter speed is high enough.
I've actually done that on the D3S. I don't think you can't do that on the D7000, but you can on the D3S and the D700 though.
Yeah.
And that's a lifesaver. Just straight in, boom, you're at 1-to-1. And at the focus point too, so that makes it really nice.
Yep. Or even farther. You can zoom in even farther than 1-to-1 if you want to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't, but I leave it on medium. So.
Yep. Same here. So, Scott, I like the fact here that you're not only catching the action on the field, you're also catching some of the stuff that's going on the sidelines and the looks of the kids that are around. Sports, to me, isn't just about capturing the action that's happening on the field. It's also about capturing, everything else that's going around. The coaches, even some of the still life stuff, like a ball sitting there with a pile of gear or something like that. If there were helmets there, if there were, all those other things, I think are a part of sports photography, and I like that you captured this image because I think it really helps.
Yeah, I really, really like I love doing candid stuff like that. For me, anybody can, pose someone or, models can pose, and that's cool, but for me, real life, that's real life. It doesn't get any more, out of the box than that. That's it. With him standing there like that, I saw that, and I just immediately that look, it almost looked like a pro football player standing there, talking to his coach.
Yep. Absolutely.
But I know what you mean about getting everything else outside of the main deal. Like you said, the sidelines, things like that.
Yep. So very good capture. I like that.
Thank you.
So, what was your last question you had?
Cropping. How much is too much? With 200 millimeter lens, I mean, I don't have the bank account to support a 600 f4.
Yep.
So, how much is too much? I mean, I know on a crop body it helps, but if you're running full frame, I guess does it matter how much you crop? I mean, or does that determine by what you're going to use the final image for, or?
It does. Yeah. You have a few options when you're talking about sports. Your first option is obviously cropping. The nice thing about just cropping in post is that you don't have to zoom in quite as far. You can leave it a little bit loose if you have to, and then come in a little bit tighter, especially if they're running right at you. If you want to try and capture a little bit more of the action, one of the other players that's running at them. I think that's definitely a good option, just to leave it a little bit loose. And sports photographers have done that for years and years and years. Now, I'm not a fan of not filling the frame, but in this instance, I think you definitely need to, especially when you're limited on the equipment that you have. You told me earlier that you just bought your D3S, so like you said, buying another big lens purchase isn't an option right now. So it's going to come down to a few things. Number one, how big is that print going to be? If that print's going to be 16 by 20, like a 20-inch print, you can probably go down to about 3,000 pixels off of that 4,200 pixels file, and you'll still be fine. I would, out of Lightroom, then up-res the file up to about 4,000, and you'll probably still be fine as long as you go to a quality lab and have it printed at a good place. That's what I've done in the past, and I've had no issues at all. In fact, I've even taken a third of a file from a D200, which was I think that was a 10 megapixel file, and that ended up being a billboard, and it was just a tiny little third of a file. So up-resing and being careful with the file and having a good exposure is the majority of the battle. If you start out with something that's underexposed by 2 or 3 stops, you're not going to get anywhere. You're not going to be able to crop it and still be able to keep that quality. So number one is going to be your exposure. If you're talking about a 40-inch print, I wouldn't crop as much. You can only crop maybe 15, 20%. 15% is probably about all that I would go out of it. So it really comes down to the size of that print and how big you're going to be printing it versus how much you're going to crop it.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Plus, if you're printing it that much bigger, I don't know. For me, I know technology's come a long way with software and everything, but up-resing stuff, like you said, it sounds like you don't really have much of a problem with that. I would think that you would lose detail.
You will lose a little bit of detail, but you're only up-resing, probably 20%, and you're not going to lose that much in that. Lightroom is made to do that. It has great algorithms to be able to do that. And if you were up-resing 300%, yeah, then you're going to have an issue. You're only going 15, 20%, whatever it is, or 25% maybe. You're going to be fine. You're not going to see any issues. And if you're worried about it, what I would do is do some tests. Do some test prints, even if they were like little 8x10 test prints. Crop a file, up-res it, export it, then go into Photoshop and just cut a piece of it to an actual 8x10 size, send it to the printer, and print a couple 8x10s and see what you like. That's really the only thing you can do to be 100% sure that you're getting what you want, is to do those tests and make sure that you're happy with the results. Your other option, which is actually a less expensive option, and a lot of people do it, and it's on the equipment side, is to go with a 1.4 or a 1.6 or a 2.0 teleconverter. Even only at a 1.4, I think they're $300, $350, which is really inexpensive. And right off the bat, with a 1.4, you almost have a 1.4 times 200, so You're almost at a 300 millimeter lens, so that's pretty darn good.
Yeah.
The new Nikon versions are really good as far as your focus speed. You're going to lose a little bit, but in a bright daylight situation, I think it's definitely a viable option and something you should consider.
Well, the new 2.0 version 3 or whatever they've got it. I've heard good things about it.
Yep.
I haven't seen one or used one yet, but I've heard good things about it. I heard that the older 2X was not that great. It was, a lot softer. Of course, I know you're going to lose some, but
Yep.
the new one I've heard good things about it. So
yeah, it's if you're doing a lot of these types of sports images and you find yourself cropping a lot, consider it, try it out, see if it's going to work for you. Did you keep your D700?
No, I traded it on the D3S.
You traded on D3S, okay. Because if you had two pro bodies, then I was going to say you could try and sign up for Nikon Professional Services, and then they could send you one for free to test out. But you have to have two pro bodies in order to get in. So
no, not two. I'm not Greg.
Someday, right? Someday.
I don't know.
So anyway, by the way, the old film cameras count. Like a Nikon F5, it counts if you have one of those. You can pick one of those up pretty cheap.
My dad's got an F1 laying around somewhere. I might have to dig it up if it even matters.
I don't know if they count that or not. I'm not sure.
Too old.
So anyway, any final closing questions? Anything else you want to talk about?
No, I think we got a lot covered. I think we're good to go for now. Sounds good.
Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Scott. Really appreciate you following up on our emails, and glad we were able to finally connect. And there's some good photos here. I'll definitely link to them from the blog so that everybody can see them.
Good deal. I appreciate all the info, and thanks for the help. You do a great job on the site. Videos are always helpful, so thanks for everything that you do with that as well.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks, guys. Greg Casillo, Casillo.com. Keep shooting. See ya.